Now we turn to the facts you need to know as America reckons with renewed discussions of white supremacy and terror in the wake of El Paso. Some of the politics can get in the way of the facts because some of Trump's allies are now falsely denying that white supremacy itself is a problem in America. Fox's Tucker Carlson kicking up a firestorm this week with new comments claiming white supremacy is just a hoax.
If you were to assemble a list, a hierarchy of concerns, of problems this country faces, where would white supremacy be on the list? Right up there with Russia, probably. It's actually not a real problem in America. White supremacy, that's the problem. This is a hoax. Just like the Russia hoax. It's a conspiracy theory used to divide the country and keep a hold on power. That's exactly what's going on.
Now to the facts. Assembling a list of problems in America isn't a hypothetical. Pollsters ask Americans to do it on the regular. And they find Americans think terrorism is a problem at polls number one. 73% of Americans saying it is a priority above the economy and even immigration. So Americans think terrorism is a big problem on their hierarchy of concerns. And who's trying to commit this terrorism here? Most people in the U.S. suspected of terrorism right now are linked to white nationalism. Facts. And that's the testimony from Donald Trump's handpicked FBI director who testified under oath. Most domestic terrorism arrests this year involve white supremacy. So the feds, including the Trump-appointed feds, say that problem we have with terrorism mostly involves white nationalists. So that exists. Facts. Now, as a matter of fatalities, which is also counted in the United States, the problem is on par with foreign terrorists like ISIS. Domestic ideological terrorists kill about as many Americans as those scary foreign-linked terrorists. So those are just some receipts for the hoax crowd. And that is based on the most extreme examples of suspects and violence. If you broaden out to include and consider hate speech, other white supremacist activity, some of which might be technically legal, like there are things you can say that are horrific, which aren't a crime, well, then pile that together and you have, and this is important as America has this debate, a pile of evidence online and on your local news.
The news hanging from a small tree in front of a dorm at Stanford.
A family in Aurora wakes up to find anti-Semitic graffiti sprayed on their home.
An Army veteran who police say is an admitted white supremacist has been charged with murder as a hate crime in the stabbing death of a black man.
The FBI says they've arrested a white supremacist after he purchased a gun from an undercover FBI agent in Myrtle Beach and said he wanted to use it in the spirit of Dylann Roof.
A 21-year-old man is facing 3 years in federal prison for his role in burning and spray painting Nazi symbols on a Carmel synagogue.
White supremacist.
White supremacy.
White supremacist.
White supremacist.
This is America. If you feel like some of the hate and violence is rising, it is. Data backing up those anecdotes you just heard, the number of documented hate groups has jumped now to over 1,000. And this real problem will not be conquered by minimizing it against the evidence, nor would it be solved by exaggerating it without evidence. In the law, hate crime probes are actually complex because it can take longer to investigate motive and intent. Authorities cannot profile by mere politics, of course, any more than by any other mere categories. So there's no logic in rushing to label just anything white supremacy before gathering facts. And there is no logic in denying the facts we have and just shouting hoax.
This is a hoax, just like the Russia hoax.
This is not a hoax. This is America. And many Americans have been telling us this for a long, painful time. Americans who lived through slavery and the amendments that were literally added to our Constitution to thwart, what was it? White supremacy? This is America. Americans who fought Jim Crow and segregation and the civil rights battles. This is America. Americans who urged us to look inward at a culture that can celebrate guns more than human lives or revere guns in white hands more than the bodies of murdered minorities. That's what Donald Glover told us so simply and so sadly, and we should reflect on it tonight. This is America. Guns in my area. I got the strap. I got to carry them. Joining me now is Maya Wiley, former counsel to the mayor of New York. She oversaw the city's police oversight agency. And also here, former Congressman Tom Coleman, Republican from Missouri. Thanks to both of you. Maya, your view of this.
What Tucker Carlson did was absolutely reprehensible because it is, as you pointed out, not true. And by not true, I mean he just lied to the American people, to his own audience. All the facts from the FBI to the Southern Poverty Law Center to the Anti-Defamation League has been documenting the increase of hate groups, and particularly white supremacist groups, as well as hate crimes. 2 points to reference to. If you look at the 2 highest months of hate crimes is in the history of our tracking the crimes. November 2016 was over 700 hate crimes that month. That was a record. That was the election. The second was after Charlottesville, when Donald Trump said, you have very fine people on both sides. And the reason I say that, it is the denial of the existence of hate groups and the hate they propagate that helps support the increase of violence. Mm-hmm. There is evidence, there is research that has actually correlated that kind of refusal to denunciate, to say, no, we don't do that here, that is not tolerated, with the actual events of violence that we see in this country.
Congressman, do you worry at this point that the basic facts we just laid out, Americans are concerned about terrorism, most domestic terrorism suspects are linked to white supremacy, the sources there are federal data, including Trump's own FBI director, that it has become a part of a political project, and I want to be very clear, of some, not all, but of some of the president's defenders to minimize or lie about those facts?
Well, there's certainly evidence of that, Ari. A whole host of leaders from the Congress got on TV after these terrible episodes that we just saw and said it was because of video games, that video games was the cause of all this. Such nonsense like this. The entire world has video games. They don't have
but let me press you
like
on
this.
that. Let me press you on that because we've covered that. Video games is whataboutism. That's look at something else.
Yes.
What we're covering is people trying to, within a certain frame, get other people to think, yeah, white supremacy, what is that about? That maybe that's quote unquote not a big deal, all the way out to quote unquote a hoax, when the numbers show the opposite.
Well, I think the American people, and I think the vast majority of the American people, know what racism is. They understand what's happening here. This is a defining moment, not only in this political campaign, but in the history of this country. I believe that Donald Trump has done himself much harm politically. I think you will see polls that will come back that the vast majority of Americans see this what it is. The man has no credibility. He spews hate. He did it when he came down the escalator in 2015, and he hasn't stopped since. They are not going to vote for a racist. They're not going to vote for somebody like this. Maybe they didn't know what he was like before, but they know now. So let's see how this plays out. But we have got to stand strong. We've got several issues here. We've got guns.
I'm going to jump in. I mean, part of what is playing out, right, Maya, is a moving of some of these goalposts. So yeah. the effort to try to take folks and confuse them about what it is, which is very extreme. I mean, if you're out here trying to do any cover for terrorism suspects, I don't care what they're linked to, you got to really look in the mirror. And then I want to play for you what Rush Limbaugh says, which whatever one thinks of the source, he is voicing something that is a different argument, that, hey, there are plenty of people who are registered in the Republican Party or who were voting for this or that, who aren't racist or who voted for Obama or whatever, and whether this paints too broad a brush in the other direction. Take a listen.
The vast majority of this country do not believe Donald Trump or you or me are white supremacists. They don't believe that we are in favor of white nationalism, but the drive-by media is trying to once again convince everybody that everybody thinks of Trump that way. They then act and behave as though everybody thinks this, and that you conservatives and Trump, you have to show us that you are not, which is impossible. It's like proving a negative. You can't do it.
well, that's not true. You absolutely can prove you're not racist, usually by your actions and by your words. And I think what we've seen from Donald Trump, and unfortunately, and I think to your point to Mr. Coleman, not new, but perfected in a very dangerous way. I would say perfected in the sense of being very explicit as opposed to implicit, is this use of blacks are criminals, right? Or Latinos are invaders. This is very explicit language that white supremacy uses.
Or Muslims are terrorists. So you're taking something that was really lethally powerful in a certain immigration framework, and all of a sudden it's blowing up in their face.
That's right. And here's the point. When you track the language of white supremacist groups, they use language like invasion for immigrants of color from Central America. Not all immigrants. They don't use invasion for Polish. So it's very racialized language, even when it doesn't use the terms of race. And my point about Donald Trump is what he has done is said, it is now okay. I am now going to use language we never, as Republicans, thought was okay to use in the past to have a policy debate in the recent past.
Right. Maya Wiley and Congressman Tom Coleman, an important discussion on the facts. Thanks to both of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.